Hi, everybody. My apologies for not being able to be with you this evening. I've been battling a respiratory infection for the last week or so, and um, I just was not up to the drive and a full class tonight. However, I did want to touch base with you about Alfred Adler before you did the forum. The reason being, he's a little bit different from some of the theorists that we have been discussing so far. Um, the class notes are available to you on eClass for Alfred Adler and for the other theorists that we have discussed so far this semester. After next week, when we discuss Karen Horney, I will be sending you your midterm exams. So, smart thing to do would be to have all of your class notes printed out and ready to go so that when you go to write your essays, you are prepared and you're not like scuttling back and forth with the textbook. Okay, so who is Alfred Adler? Some of you mentioned that you've heard of him before. Alfred Adler was very much the opposite of Dr. Freud's theory of personality, which we spent a lot of time in class discussing. Um, Freud focused a lot on sex and aggression and repressed memories and the defense mechanisms and all of that stuff. Um, the one thing that Adler did defend was when Freud wrote his book Interpretation of Dreams. Um, at first, they were colleagues, but later on, once very much like Carl Jung, once Alfred Adler started to question Dr. Freud's theories and expand on them a little bit. They did have a falling out. And when you think of Alfred Adler, you should think of the term individual psychology. Okay. And what that means is that people are not motivated by selfish biological instincts, the way that Freud said, the pleasure principle and all of that. Instead, they are characterized by an inner harmony, trying to be cooperative. This relates to humanism and existentialism. So, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the triangle where you start at the bottom with your physiological needs and you go to the top for your self-actualization. These theories kind of dovetail together. The reason being is individual psychology emphasizes the conscious mind. Future goals are an important source of motivation. So you guys should be able to relate to this and the fact that you are college students and you have a goal of getting a degree and then using that degree to move forward in your careers. And basically, what Adler said is how much you want that degree, how much you want that career is what will motivate you to do things like go to class, log online, and listen to lectures, do your assignments, and try to be the best students that you can be. Um, he said that our social motives are primary, meaning that our environment, the people who are around us, are very influential in the way that we behave, in the way that we think, in the way that we feel. Um, that's kind of a sociological perspective, and again, that goes along with like that humanist kind of way of thinking. Um, he was very optimistic about human beings and our overall nature, as opposed to Dr. Freud, who had a pretty negative viewpoint on us and as human beings. And as I told you before in class, you have to take these theorists from the time in history where they lived. Freud lived through World War II. Alfred Adler did not. He analyzed your dreams, but he did it for a different purpose than some of the other analysts that we've discussed. He wanted to learn about your lifestyle. Did you have a healthy lifestyle or an unhealthy lifestyle? He also felt that human beings are free to determine our own personality. This definitely strays away from what Freud said, what Carl Jung said, and the fact that they basically said that biological instincts have a lot to do with our personality development, that our personalities are pretty much set, you know, around the ages 3 to 5. He was much more optimistic about us being able to make our own choices in how we want to approach the world, and tried to give a more positive outlook just basically on, excuse me, the human condition. Um, he minimized the importance of sex in his theory. So that definitely did not make Dr. Freud very happy. Um, and he also wasn't really into Carl Jung's theory about our libido and the psyche. So he broke away from them with those two things. And basically, his goal in therapy was for you to develop what's called a healthy lifestyle. Um, excuse me, just trying to get to my notes here. Um, Sorry, I'm not feeling well today. Okay. Um, he basically said that the mother's relationship with the child is absolutely um, imperative to the child's psychological and emotional development. He also said that, for a child to have good social skills, social motives, he called them, they learn that from the mother. And there is a lot of truth to that. I don't know if you guys have ever sat there and like said or done something and you're like, oh my God, I sound just like my mom. I do it all the time. Um, and it just makes sense that your mom would be the person who would motivate you to interact with other people or not motivate you. I'm not saying that dads don't have a huge influence in this area also, but Adler really emphasized that mother-child relationship, and that also does go along with Dr. Freud and Dr. Jung, in that initial relationship between mother and child is unbelievably important in regards to how they develop their self-esteem and their self-concept. Dr. Erickson, he talks about that in his psychosocial theory. But basically, what Adler was really interested in was our place in our families, meaning our birth order. Okay, so um, let's be honest, kids are treated differently within families depending upon what their needs are, what their personalities are like. Um, Also, how many kids are in your family. How we've talked about this in class. How many years are between the kids? What are the genders? All of those things come into place. But what he basically said was that the firstborn um, definitely needs to be at an age where they are autonomous. That's Erickson. Um, to be able to accept the secondborn. The reason being, the firstborn may feel dethroned, meaning basically literally thrown off their throne of being in charge of what goes on. And, they've had mom and dad's attention and the family's attention since they were born. And now all of a sudden, this other baby comes along, and it can be quite startling for the firstborn child. But typically, they do pretty much grow out of that as the younger sibling starts to mature and they become playmates. Sometimes they become partners in crime. Sometimes they don't like each other, whatever it may be. And the age difference is important because when they're born very, very close together, oftentimes they're going through the same developmental stages or similar developmental stages, which is exhausting for both mom and whoever else it is that is working with the kids. So please forgive me for this turning of the pages here. The second born, they tend to be very ambitious. So, what is that about? They're constantly, subconsciously or consciously, or both, trying to catch up to their older sibling. They're trying to compensate. They um, don't really like being told what to do. Strict leadership is something that a lot of times they will rebel against. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that when you have an older sibling and you have parents and other adults, you're basically being told what to do all the time. So there's kind of like this resentment that um, comes along with strict leadership. So if you have parenting style that's authoritarian, meaning this is my house, these are my rules, this is the way things are going to be done, and that's it. Excuse me. What may happen is the second born child may be the one who rebels, and that is considered very normal. The youngest child, usually they're the ones who uh, are treated a little bit differently when they're being raised. The reason being, they're the babies, and we've talked about this in class also. They're most likely to try to step outside of the box of what their family expects of them. Meaning that, you know, let's say you come from a family where you have a family business, right? And the older sibling is going to take over that business, and the second born child may reject the business or may try to find ways to expand upon that business. The youngest child might say, you know what, I'm really not into all of this right now. I'm going to go do my own thing. And then he talks about the only child and compares the only child to the firstborn, in the fact that they resent being dethroned. And that usually happens when they go to school. It's the first time that they have to share toys. They have to listen to directions from an adult who's not a parent. Um, Depending upon what family structure they come from, this might be the first time they're really around other kids their age. So you can see that they might either rebel against the teacher, or they might really enjoy starting to explore, themselves and other kids their age. But they definitely have a tendency to want to be the center of attention, and it makes a lot of sense because when you are the youngest child, or I'm sorry, the only child, you have the undivided attention of your parents, your grandparents, aunts, uncles. So when you look at the only child and you look at the firstborn, oftentimes their psychologies are very much the same. The other thing is, if you're an only child, when it comes to taking care of your parents, when it comes to, what your parents expect of you, the expectations may be higher because you are the only child. Um, so there's a lot that goes along with this, and none of this is absolute. You have to think about your own family. Maybe you can relate to some of this depending upon where you are in the birth order. As I told you guys, I am the oldest child, and I remember my sister coming home from the hospital, and I don't think I felt dethroned, but I definitely was very curious as to why she got a lot of attention. And um, you know as we got older, we got very, very close, and now she's my best friend. But from a 3.5-year old's perspective, it was pretty overwhelming to have another baby in the house. And it took me a few months to kind of warm up. And if you think about the kids in your family or children that I'm sure that you can relate to this. So, the factors that affect the birth order include, again, like I said before, the sex of the siblings. Do you have boys and girls? Is it all girls? Is it all boys? Numbers of years. Kids who are born very close together, meaning within less than 2.5 to 3.5 years. Again, they're very close developmentally, so there might be more competition. There's more stress on the parents in the fact that one child is not autonomous yet. The way that other family members view the child is internalized very, very early on. And all of these things contribute to their psychological development, and also their development of relationships within the family. Um, we talked a lot about this already in class. You may not feel close to your parents, but you may have an aunt, an uncle who, is more of a parental figure, a grandparent. Sometimes when you have an older sibling, especially one who's a decade or more older, you may look at them as a maternal or paternal figure. Why? Because they're 10 years older and they tend to take on more of a parentified role with the younger kids. The other thing is the size of families has decreased in the last century or so. Number one, the Industrial Revolution, and number two, birth control. People can plan how many children they'd like to have. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you needed to have 5 or 6 kids. You needed people in the family to work on the farm, to bring more resources into the home. Now that we're in the 21st century, things are very different, especially when it comes to things like in vitro fertilization and family planning of that nature, where you can basically freeze your eggs and decide how many years are between your siblings. Ideally, Adler and the other theorists agree that about 2.5 to 3.5 years between siblings is good. Again, that way the older child is more autonomous and the younger child does not feel left behind. The older child has a less likely chance of feeling dethroned. And as they get older and they go towards late middle school and adolescence, you'll start to see usually that the siblings become closer. You know, every family is different. So Adler's making a lot of generalizations. But Adler was really interested not only in the birth order, but in the way that we form our memories and what our first memories actually are. So, if we were in class right now, I would ask you to raise your hands and tell me what your earliest memories were and how old you were, excuse me, when you had those memories. Typically, you'll give me something around the age of 2.5 to 4 years of age. I think my earliest memory is about the age of 3 and being on the beach with my family. Um, I think Adler was really interested in this because he felt that this was the best way to decide whether or not a person was living a healthy or an unhealthy lifestyle. He talks a lot about the healthy and the unhealthy lifestyle, which is addressed in your textbook. Um, but he figured the earlier memories that you have are kind of like the starting point that you have in life. So if you have traumatic memories, that's your starting point. If you have memories like I do of being on the beach with my family, that was my starting point. My family's very close. We spent a lot of time together, so it makes sense. Um, it's irrelevant whether or not these memories are accurate. That's important. It's irrelevant whether or not they are accurate. What it's about is perception. And what you have to try to remember is that if you are having your first memory around the age of 3, your perception of the world is quite different than it is at the age of 20 or 40 or any other time in your life. So, what it's about mostly is perception. So, my first memories, I have a good perception of them. Someone else may have negative perception of their first memories, and that Adler said will impact their overall development and coping skills in life. Um, our worldview, our life goals, basically what we want to do with ourselves has a lot to do with our childhood. And that's something that most of the theorists do agree on. And Adler's thing was really more about how you recollect your childhood. And this gets really interesting in family therapy and counseling when you have siblings sit down and they start, talking about mom and dad or, things that went on when they were kids. And you'll have different siblings have a completely different viewpoint of what was going on, and what the therapist is looking at is everything I just mentioned is, how old are they, how many kids are in this family, how old were they when this event occurred, so why are their perceptions different. The other thing is we all do have our defense mechanisms and utilize them to deal with traumatic memories. So when you're going into a therapeutic situation and siblings have experienced trauma, they may report it in very different ways just because of the way that their ego basically tried to protect them using the defense mechanisms that we discussed with Dr. Freud and also with Dr. Young. Um, One of the things Adler did agree with Dr. Freud about was the importance of dream analysis. He agreed that they were important, but he did not necessarily agree with the way that Freud interpreted them. So this is kind of like a sticky area in the area of psychiatry, and the fact that um, if different analysts are analyzing your dreams in different ways, they're going to view you differently, treat you differently, possibly diagnose you differently. But Adler basically said, you know, if you're a healthy person and you're living a good lifestyle, your dreams will reflect that. Um, and that if you're not having a healthy lifestyle, your dreams will reflect that also. Um, he also said that dreams provide a certain sense of self-deception, in the fact that um, it's necessary to maintain a perception of yourself. And he said that in our dreams, how we feel about ourselves is definitely something that comes through. I think a lot of us could understand that. Um, but the bad dreams, okay, that's that kind of irrational emotional part of ourselves that's looking for some sort of support to deal with stress, anxiety, trauma, whatever it may be. So for this week, what I would like you guys to do is to please excuse me, take the time to review the videos that I posted for you on Adler's theories. There's several of them, and I know a lot of you did your forum already. You may want to look at the videos and then look at your forum and see if you can expand upon it. Um, if you have not, you should just watch the videos, period. And if you have not opened up your textbook, you should have last week for Carl Jung. You definitely need to for Alfred Adler. I'm just giving you a brief synopsis of what the main components of his theories were. And the class notes for um, Alfred Adler are available under week 5 on eClass, and there you will find your forum assignment and the videos. My apologies for not getting to campus this evening. I've been battling this, I don't know, upper respiratory sinus thing for a week or two, and I just was not up to the drive. So, and I also didn't want to get anyone sick. So, if you guys have any questions or concerns or just thoughts about this, please email me. I will be online at 6:55 to see who is watching this, and I can tell if you watched it in its entirety. So your attendance for tonight is contingent upon watching the full 25 minutes that I've given you guys. Um, you should have your notes printed out and you should be reading your textbook. Next week, we will be discussing Karen Horney's theory of personality, and then we roll into the midterm. So, my suggestion to you is to look ahead. Your midterm review sheet is posted on eClass. You might want to take a look at that to collect your notes and start outlining your textbooks. And again, if you haven't opened up your book yet, you really need to do that, especially for the chapter on Carl Jung and this chapter on Alfred Adler. Um, my apologies for any inconvenience with me not physically being there today, but I will be back online at 6:55 until 8:20 p.m., which is our normal class time. So please send me a message or an email if you have any questions about anything that has to do with this theory, and we will move on when I see you next week. Have a good evening, and I will see you soon. Take care.